there needs to be justice at some point. I know that we're trying to push back and to stop children being continuously harmed, but actually those responsible for this need to face justice. I'm hell bent on that, actually.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome. I'm here today with James Esses, who is a therapist, author, and founder of Just Therapy, and I'm excited for a great conversation. So, welcome, James.
Thanks, Ryan. Looking forward to it.
So, tell me a little bit about who you are, where you come from, your backstory.
Yeah, well, I come from Ireland originally, although you can't tell from my accent. I sound like just some generic Brit. But I started off post-university in law, criminal law, defense, and then prosecution. And I was working in the public sector for a few years. Uh, but I wasn't finding it that fulfilling. And I'd done some volunteering counseling with children. And so I thought, why not start a course in psychotherapy and see how I get on with that? And that's what unleashed the mayhem on my life, because I was partway through my degree. I was on the cusp of setting up my private practice. This is now back in 2021. And at the same time, gender ideology was beginning to take off more and more, and I was seeing the impact of it through my training, through my volunteer counseling, and I felt that ethically I had to say something, because it seemed to fly in the face of good therapeutic ethics. And for that, I lost my course. I was kicked off my degree, and I've spent a number of years fighting litigation, trying to get a sense of justice out of what happened to me. And I got that last year. And last December, thankfully, I was able to set up a private practice again. And I founded this group called Just Therapy, which is trying to promote ethical therapy, free from ideology, free from identity politics. And that's what I've been doing the last 6 or so months. So it's all been very exciting. And I'm just very privileged that I've had the opportunity to do it again, because at one point it looked as if my career was over before
Hmm.
it started.
Yeah. So take us back to that kind of that big event, because I think a lot of people who kind of swim in our waters of heterodox therapists, it seems kind of more common sense to us to question a lot of these gender practices.
Hmm.
And in the last few years, we've had like the CAS review and the WPATH files and different things come out. So it seems common sense to a lot of people, but put us in your shoes at that time when it was not everybody else was swimming a different direction.
Well, I was relatively late to the game. Do you know? I mean, there were people talking out on this issue 2016, 2017. But as I said, I saw it more and more. I mean, I was being preached it on my course, but I was able to kind of turn a bit of a blind eye to that. I thought, just try and keep my head down and just get through it. But when I began to open my eyes to the harm being caused to children, and particularly the harm being caused to children through unethical therapy, kind of pushing this ideology on them, and almost encouraging them down this path towards medicalization, that was too far for me. Um, and at the time in the UK, and this is still a debate that's ongoing years later, there were talks of banning what they're calling conversion therapy, which is essentially talking therapy that does anything other than affirm a child's belief that they're trapped in the wrong body. They wanted to ban that under the guise of conversion therapy, and follow the suit of other countries around the world. Um, and I was very concerned by this, because it would essentially criminalize ethical explorative therapists. And so I wrote a petition to the UK government saying, don't do this, essentially. That was the catalyst for me being kicked off the course, actually. It was that petition.
Hmm. That that just seems so bizarre to me that, if it were any other issue, any other type of what we would consider a delusion, like a schizophrenic delusion, the ethical thing to do is to kind of help talk someone through that so they can have more like in CBT reality testing or
Mm.
something like that, so they can have a more accurate view of the world and lower some of that distress. But for some reason, we put this in a completely different category. Like why is that?
Because it has been twisted, and now, well, according to the activists and increasingly just members of the public, it's seen as an identity rather than a mental health condition. We see that even with the language and the way in which gender dysphoria as a condition is being watered down, under the relevant diagnostic manuals. Um, and I'm being sent materials from whistleblowers all over the UK and abroad of company policies, for example. And time again, people are being told being transgender, medically transitioning, this is not a health condition, it's an identity. And that's the issue. Um, but it doesn't make any sense because if it's not a health condition, then why does it require medication and surgery? I've asked that question many times of gender ideologues, and I've never had a decent answer.
Yeah, it seems bizarre. It's almost like because it's instead of looking at it as like a psychological or like a medical condition, if you put it in that category of identity, it's able to become like a sacred category and transcend the need for evidence.
That's it. And, we kind of shot ourselves in the foot in the sense that, at one point in time, not that long ago, being gay was classified as a mental health condition. And obviously that's shifted over recent years. But now activists pushing this narrative can point to that and they can say, well, there was a time in which you would tell us that being gay was a mental health condition, and look how that turned out. And this is just exactly the same. But of course, this isn't the same for a variety of reasons, in part because one's sexuality or being gay, again, does not require you to do anything other than feel that attraction to someone else and live your life in accordance with it. It does not require you to sterilize yourself through hormones and then mutilate yourself via surgery. It's completely different.
It seems so bizarre that the kind of the line of reasoning is, well, a generation ago, people were bullying and harassing gay people, and they thought they were right, but they didn't realize they weren't on the right side of history, and you kind of want to be ahead of the curve on this one, and so you should kind of rubber stamp like any kind of medical procedure that we want to do because some people were wrong before, you don't want to be wrong again, kind of that mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And people are very fearful of that because, public shame is very effective. And people don't want to be seen to be immoral or kind of antiquated and not kind of with the current, I guess, social agenda and social norms. So I think a lot of people have gone along with it for that reason alone. I mean, in the UK, up until not that long ago, there was a piece of legislation that essentially prevented schools from even teaching about homosexuality. It was called Section 28. That was the part of the relevant legislation. And now, when I and others make calls for schools to stop teaching and pushing gender ideology and stop telling children that they may have been born in the wrong body, activists come and say, you're just trying to bring back Section 28 all over again, aren't you? So they're always bringing it back to that fight and trying to compare the two.
Yeah, it's this seems so bizarre because the whole conversation around gender identity seems to be driven by political activists, and the psychology and medical professions seem to just get in line behind them without asking too many questions.
Well, the professions have been taken over by the activists.
Mm.
I mean, I've done various exposés on some of the leading mental health, regulatory bodies over here in the UK, and they're full-blown ideologues. I mean, they are pushing this from the top down, actually. So it's very difficult these days to distinguish between activist and practitioner. I know members of the public looking for therapeutic support are really struggling, actually, to discern the difference and to find someone who doesn't have an agenda, essentially.
There seems to be like this attitude with a lot of these people that might dispute your claim and say, well, our activism and our push for better mental health are the same thing because our activism is the path to mental health. Like you have to kind of reform society to get to that, better place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And there's some sense in that, and because you want people are not going to do they're not going to thrive mentally if their surroundings are not right, and if they don't have the right foundations underneath them, but again, it doesn't work when it comes to this issue in particular, because what you're actually doing is encouraging, as you said earlier, delusional thinking that doesn't have any basis in reality. I mean, that's completely and utterly anti-therapeutic, even if it makes the person feel better. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not a therapist or a psychologist's job to tell people what they want to hear, even if it makes them feel better. It's about something deeper than that. It's about enabling people to live properly and in reality. I mean, so much of my clinical work is actually getting people to accept things as they are. It's not about necessarily, it's not about changing things. It's about looking at what is in your control, what is not in your control, and accepting. Whereas this does the complete opposite. This promises silver bullets.
Mm. So, what kind of consequences, physical, mental, emotional, were you seeing with some of these kids who were undergoing these type of transitions?
Well, I was seeing a lot of alienation from loved ones, parents reaching out to me. I'm working with some parents at the moment clinically who have essentially become utterly estranged from their children because they weren't willing to affirm their new identity. And so the children have kind of upped and left, and some of them haven't spoken to their kids in years, and that's not good for anyone. So I've seen that. I've seen the continued emotional turmoil because these children think and are told that once you've transitioned, all will be well. And they realize actually that they haven't resolved the underlying, I don't know, hatred or dislike they've got for themselves. They're just as uncomfortable as they were before. Um, I've witnessed the severe physical ramifications of transitioning. I interviewed one detransitioner before, and telling me about his first thoughts when he woke up after having had his penis mutilated and amputated, and immediately he was thinking, "Shit, I've destroyed my life," and that instantaneous regret, and I can't even comprehend that. I mean, that's something you can never get over for obvious reason. I mean, physically, mentally, there's no coming back from that. So, and then all the children who have been left infertile um, from puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. So, I mean, this, like, as far as I'm concerned, this is the really the medical travesty of our time, and I can't quite believe that we've enabled this. And I think there needs to be justice at some point. I know that we're trying to push back and to stop children being continuously harmed, but actually those responsible for this need to face justice. I'm hell bent on that, actually.
I'm completely with you there, and I think you look at this in historical terms. Michael Schellenberger said this is arguably the greatest medical scandal in human history. I think it's on par or worse than lobotomies and things like that. You look at so many young people who have mutilated genitals or permanently infertile or permanent loss of sexual functioning. Like, is there going to be a reckoning for this, like you were saying?
Well, I don't know really, and the difficulty is that this is now a global issue, but every jurisdiction is handling it completely differently. Do you know? Like the UK is doing more and better than most to push back against this. Since the re-election of Trump, so too is the United States. But there's plenty of places around the world that are continuing to push this nonsense. We've seen that in Canada. I've seen it in my hometown of Dublin and other places as well as New Zealand, Australia, etc. So there's no consistency across the board. This actually feels to me like something that, as naff as it sounds, like the entire world needs to come together in a sense of unity over this. But we're going to end up in a scenario in which puberty blockers might be illegal in the United Kingdom, but are perfectly legal in Canada. And that doesn't make sense because this is a universal evil. It's not it's not subjective, it's not context specific, it's not country dependent, it's universally bad.
What do you make of the explosion of new gender identity diagnoses? I know we're both friends with Stephanie Wynn, who's got a lot of material on rapid onset gender dysphoria. It seems like a lot of the normal parts of angst and discomfort with, adolescence and puberty, we've kind of said, okay, this is a specific medical thing. We know how to fix you, as opposed to this is just uncomfort in your body as your body changes. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, and this is the risk of um, looking at everything through a therapeutic lens and pathologizing everything, because so much of this is simply, as you say, normal uh, thinking patterns, normal angst. I mean, puberty is uncomfortable for most in one form or another. Um, it's and the hormones are all over the place, uncontrollable changes can appear out of the blue. An entire cohort of children in the friendship groups are all maturing at different speeds and in different ways, and so it starts to kind of set people apart in that way. I mean, it's not an enjoyable period of time for many. But in the old days, what could a parent do other than say, well, I went through it and I survived and you will too. These days, the children are told, well, there's a pill for that. And I think, certainly from my own clinical work, I think a lot of these kids, it's not actually that they genuinely believe they're in the wrong body. They don't want puberty and what comes with that.
Mm.
Some of them don't want to grow up, actually. They because puberty is a sign that they are starting to move towards adulthood, uh, and this is a phenomenon I'm seeing as well. And I think lockdown hasn't helped, social media hasn't helped, and all the rest of it. But I think there's a lot of kids out there who want to stay kids forever. Kind of a Peter Pan type syndrome, and I think
Yes.
this is caught up in that.
I've heard that called Peter Pan syndrome, and I feel like this goes beyond just like you're saying, beyond just the gender dysphoria piece or the avoidance of puberty piece. I mean, there's a lot of I'm thinking specifically in the U.S. There's a lot of younger men who never move out of their parents' home and just kind of play video games and never like they want to stay in that kind of childlike state forever. It seems like this is kind of like the canary in the coal mine in a sense of like a bigger, broader social issue.
Yeah, it is. There's a reason why we've seen such a significant increase in the number of children, coming out, quote unquote, as trans or non-binary. I mean, this is, contagions have operated over time. We've seen that, and it almost seems that every generation has got a new kind of mental health contagion that it's particularly vulnerable to, and this is the current generations, and it's this is the problem. It's so complicated as well that it's it's both incredibly simple and incredibly complicated. I think for the vast majority of children, if they're simply left alone, not even offered therapy, just left alone to just go through it, even if it's a bit tough at times, but hopefully with a bit of support and empathy from the parents and loved ones, that's it. They'll be fine and they will grow out of it. Um, for those that it's more persistent, then the only course of action has to be psychotherapy, because what else could it possibly be? This is a mental health condition, and for mental health conditions, psychotherapy should be the first port of call for that. But I try to strike a balance between, as I said, like under pathologizing and over pathologizing. Someone who genuinely believes that they are born in the wrong body, they are suffering from a mental health condition. But most kids who are coming out as trans don't fall into that camp. For them, as we said, it's tied up in something else, or it's a bit of a social fad or a trend, um, and we should just leave well enough alone. So I'm not encouraging every child that says, "Mom, Dad, I'm trans," to be sent to a therapist.
Do you think you mentioned like a social trend? Do you think part of this is like grasping for some type of social capital? In kind of the world of social justice and intersectionality, you kind of have to have some type of badge of oppression to make you kind of authentic. And if I'm, for example, like a heterosexual white man, that's like not a lot of points in intersectionality. It's pretty vanilla. And so if I were to say, well, I'm non-binary, that's kind of like a chip in the game in a sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's the easiest thing in the world because you don't actually have to do anything. All you have to do is announce it and it becomes so. And look, who wouldn't want that? I mean, we've just come out of Pride Month, an entire month to celebrate you and what you stand for. And that term celebration is used time and time again. One of the political parties, because I think yesterday was International Non-Binary Day. Great day of the year. One of my favorite celebrations. And one of the main political parties in the UK, the Liberal Democrats, put out something on X saying, we celebrate all non-binary people. What exactly are you celebrating? I don't, this term is so overused now. Like, okay, respect and tolerance is one thing, but celebration? For what purpose? What have these people done that deserve celebrating? But I can see how for a child that would be quite an addictive thing, actually, to get, as you said, that social capital, that recognition, and also a bit of protection as well, because as sure as night follows day, that if someone gets picked on and they're identifying as trans or non-binary, I mean, the bully, they're going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. So in some ways, it kind of makes you untouchable in a way.
Mm. It seems like this type of thing is very appealing to kids on the autism spectrum who might be a little bit more socially awkward, have trouble making friends, and then you kind of dip a toe in and say, I might be non-binary, and you get love bombed, and that's like just kind of a snowball of reinforcement for you. Is that you seeing that as well?
Yes. Well, we know from the statistics, the clear correlation between autism and gender dysphoria. The vast majority of my clinical clients who are trans identified have diagnosis of autism. So I'm seeing it in my clinical practice as well. It's not surprising because we know the ways in which autism can lead people to think, and people with autism can engage in quite black or white thinking, for example. And so I think can be more susceptible to kind of regressive stereotypes. Well, if you're a young girl, but you actually prefer what the boys are wearing and what the boys are playing, and you just prefer hanging out with boys, well, then maybe it's because you're a boy, not because you're a girl who just enjoys things that are more traditionally masculine. So I think they're more susceptible to that. Um, and also, well, I've seen this actually from a lot of like autistic charities, and they try to excuse it as saying, well, the reason that there's more autistic people identifying as trans isn't because it's a mental health condition, it's just because autistic people know themselves better than non-autistic people. They're just a lot more aware and sure of them, of who they are, um, which of course is absolute nonsense.
Mm. Wow. So a second ago, you talked about how this was a very top-down phenomenon, and it almost like it feels like there's this grand conspiracy theory, not to be conspiratorial, but it seems like there's something behind that. Where here in the U.S., it was the American Counseling Association, the American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, pediatrics, everybody was on board with this child gender transition thing. And to you and I, it's like, why is no one raising any red flags? Like what is going on here where it seems like everybody, all the major players in our field got duped by this?
Well, I don't view it in silo. This is part of the kind of cultural revolution of DEI and, well, social justice activism more broadly. Because now for an organization not to have a head of DEI role, for an organization to not have a DEI policy and all the rest of it would almost seem bizarre. It would seem like they were missing something. It's par for the course that medical trusts, schools, universities have got transgender and non-binary inclusion policies. So I think for a lot of these organizations, they're doing it just they're kind of almost on autopilot with it in a way because they don't want to be the odd ones out. I think that's part of it. But as I say, I mean, I do feel that activists have positioned themselves in places of influence and power. And I don't think that is conspiratorial to say. Um, you know, I haven't actually released this yet, but I sent someone along to go undercover to a conference last week. The conference is called Queering Academia, and it was held at the University of Westminster, right in the heart of London. And these professors and senior members of faculty there were basically encouraging staff and students to become activists, that they must go out and try and ensure that academia is queered, in their words. So I think for a lot of these academics, they view the role as activist first and then academic second. And I think that's also part of it. But it's some people who push this stuff are pure evil. Some people are doing it because they genuinely think they're doing the right thing. Some people are doing it because they want an easy life and they don't want to be accused of being regressive or transphobic or whatever. Um, and some people are just utterly naive.
Mm.
Those are probably the four main buckets as far as I'm concerned.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it feels like there's like a certain type of person that's just the true believer, all in, I would kill and die for this religion of social justice, and a lot of other people who kind of go along with it because that's just what we do here. I put my pronouns in my email sign off because that's just kind of what we do here. It seems like a lot of people are just kind of following along with the, follow the leader kind of thing.
And it's look, it is tough to push back against it. I'm not pretending that it's easy. I mean, as I said, public shaming is a very effective tool, and it can be used in a positive way as well. I mean, public sense of morality and shame can kind of help keep a society in check and stop people just running rampant and doing whatever they like. But, I spoke to someone recently who very much is against this whole gender ideology nonsense, but they were at an event and they were asked to go around and introduce themselves. And whoever the host was started off saying the name and the pronouns. Everyone kept saying the name and the pronouns. And by the time it got to this person, they really didn't want to say them, but they felt almost compelled to. They were too anxious by that point to not say the pronouns for fear of being judged or being seen as kind of different to the rest of the group. And so they went along with it through gritted teeth. And that demonstrates the power of this, actually, in the way in which it compels people to go along with it, even if they don't believe in it.
It reminds me of the Solomon Asch experiment on conformity, if you're familiar with that one.
Go
Judging which lines are the same length, and five people would give the wrong answer, then they go to the person's seat. A lot of times they just go along with the crowd because I didn't want to look different. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked about like DEI broadly beyond just the gender identity thing. What else are you seeing in therapy? Because I know, like in my grad program, critical race theory and kind of deconstructing white privilege, those are big themes. What are you seeing in therapy around other kind of DEI issues?
I think critical race theory is a big one. Therapists being actively encouraged to bring race and skin color into the therapy room, to note differences in skin color and ethnicity between themselves and their clients, to consider power imbalances that exist merely because of difference in skin color. So I see a lot of that. Um, Increasingly, I see things associated with kind of climate change as well. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, I don't. I've come across like policies and even kind of academic prospectuses for courses which bring in sustainability. They kind of just shoehorn it in. But again, I don't think that's unique to the world of therapy. That's because now organizations feel out of place if they aren't doing something to help the environment. Do you know what I mean? But
Mm.
I would have liked to think that therapy could have been more immune from this type of stuff because you're encouraged to think about things from different perspectives, listen to those that you may not agree with, dialogue and active listening and all of those core therapeutic principles. But therapists seem to have taken this stuff on hook, line, and sinker. But yeah, I mean, the racial stuff is really very bad because it defeats the entire notion that you're meant to treat the person sat in front of you as an individual. I mean, that is like one of the core ethical principles of psychotherapy, to not make assumptions, to listen and be curious and learn about what your client is going through and where they've been, rather than assuming that because they've got a particular sex or a skin color that you all of a sudden know all about them. And I hear of straight white male clients almost being chastised from the therapist because they have privilege, and black clients being told by the therapist that they are victims of institutional racism. Like, this is not good.
Yeah, with the climate thing, that one seems bizarre. It seems to be like their ace of spades, their trump card, because you say, well, how in the world is this helping an individual client on their mental health? And the response is, well, climate change is going to kill us all, so that kind of justifies really anything we do at this point. There's really no arguing at that point. And like on the race thing, I don't see anyone winning. Like I don't see a white client who's gets better mental health care because they're scolded about their white privilege. It seems a lot of this stuff seems disgusting when you apply it to racial minorities because the assumption is that they're less capable of handling, good therapy than a white client would be. And so, like, any of your gold standard therapies are kind of off the table, and you kind of have to just affirm victimhood, which seems like it's gonna like guarantee a worsening of those symptoms.
It's gonna end up as a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because life is tough, and actually, it's really quite enticing to have an explanation or a justification as to why you haven't made it in life. And you know, let's say for children or adolescents being told that, well, their people have suffered historic injustices that they can never truly overcome, and that people will always look at them in a certain way, and that they will always be hamstrung in a particular manner as well, no matter what they do. I mean, and this sounds harsh, but I think it needs to be said. I mean, what an appealing get out of jail free card that is, right?
Mm,
Because now, if I screw up in life, I don't reach my full potential, it's not my fault, it's someone else's fault, it's the
mm.
system's fault, it's society's fault. And I don't think we should be encouraging this of young people. I think we should be empowering them. And this is very disempowering, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked with clients from a variety of different races, and a lot of the racial minorities I've worked with are really grateful for like tools you would get from things like CBT
Mm.
because they feel like this is empowering me to take control of my own life. Like this is giving me some type of autonomy. But what I learned in grad school classes is like things like CBT are inappropriate for like a black client because somehow it's like gaslighting or something like that. Are you seeing that type of mentality?
Well, I've seen a real attack on kind of foundational and more traditional therapeutic theories and techniques, uh, in and to substitute in more, what do they call it? Indigenous thinking.
Mm,
I think is what's I've seen that in some therapeutic manuals as well. This notion that all of the foundational thinkers in the world of mental health and psychology, well, they were all white men who are now dead, and so uh, we need to open up the space to different forms of thought now. They just disregard, as I said, the foundational theories which have withstood the test of time and clearly ring true for many people. They're just disregarded now because of their skin color. So yeah, CBT, psychoanalysis, psychodynamic thinking, well, that's a bit passe. And I think that's concerning as well. Um, I don't. Is there a place for indigenous thinking in the world of psychology? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I'd be curious to learn what that is, but I like to follow models that have some basis in, again, reality, also some evidence base, and that you can actually test. Um, I'm not quite sure how indigenous thinking applies, but
Yeah, it's like saying the words white man is like another trump card. You say, well, hey, there's a lot of evidence for what I'm proposing, but it doesn't seem like there's any evidence for indigenous-based therapies. And say, well, Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis were white men, therefore, just kind of by definition, that you can dismiss those. They're like not relevant forms of therapy. that in and of itself disqualifies it.
Yeah. And which is, by the way, racist.
Yeah.
Like this is these organizations pushing anti-racism policies. That is the definition of racism. um, where I was studying and where I was kicked off, all of the classrooms are named after kind of foundational thinkers in psychotherapy and psychology. And there was like a petition doing the rounds to essentially remove a number of the names and substitute them in for people. And of course, the ones they were wanting to get rid of were white and
Mm.
usually male, and they wanted to replace them with female and black, which is I don't have any problem with wanting to have a mixture of thinkers represented, in a school, but the quality of the teaching where I was studying wasn't particularly great, and the fact that they were spending time, energy, and even money focusing in on trying to eradicate the names of certain thinkers from the doors of the classrooms is a bit telling. They've got the priorities skewed.
You brought up something. You said that the quality of teaching wasn't great. I've noticed that in my grad program as well. And I'm wondering, like, I like to say if they taught me great therapy skills and techniques, and then at the end of every class we did a land acknowledgement, I probably wouldn't, object that much. But the reality is that the social justice piece completely trumps any like good training that we would get, and it feels like we're very underprepared. I'm wondering if you saw that in your program.
Yeah. I mean, look, to be honest, I don't actually, this is probably controversial, but I don't actually think that core therapeutic skills can be taught. I do think it's something that you embody and you either have or you don't. And I witnessed that from some of my classmates on the course. Um, and but no, theory and literature and all the rest of it, yes, for sure, and people can study and hone their skills in that way and formulate their own framework in that way. But I think the kind of the person to person skills, I don't think can be taught. But it's what is being taught is not being taught well. Um, Even the people pursuing vocation in psychotherapy, uh, I think it's attracting the wrong kind of person. To be honest, I think it's attracting a lot of people who are pretty messed up themselves and who think that this is the answer to their problems. And that's a red flag as far as I'm concerned. Um, so, if I think back to some of the people that I've witnessed over the course of my training, etc., I mean, like some of them were, I can only describe them as a nervous wreck. I mean, I had one colleague who was too afraid to do any kind of speaking or exercise, like role playing exercise in front of the class because of some historic trauma. Now, we never knew what that trauma was, but actually, she was given a complete pass on that. And she was excused having to do um, examination that was mandatory for the rest of us. And that's worrying because what happens when she's faced with a difficult client, who brings up something particularly traumatic or distressing? What happens if a client starts to get a bit frustrated or even aggressive towards her, which is perfectly possible? Well, she's probably going to crumble. And that's not in anyone's interests. So I'm I've become very cynical, but I'm neither impressed with those teaching psychotherapy nor those studying it.
Mm. What do you think the effect that's having on the field? It seems like it's becoming watered down and like uh like just less helpful, I guess, as a profession.
Yeah, the skills have been diluted. I mean, the running joke these days is that all the therapists say is, and how did that make you feel? And there's some truth to that because there's a hell of a lot of therapists doing nothing but that. Actually, I've seen it myself. So I don't think it's attracting the kind of rigorous thinkers that it once did. Um, I think it's become too obsessed with feelings as well. I mean, that's a bit of a buzzword these days. And of course, look, it's going to come up in therapy and it comes up in my therapy because, a lot of difficulties that people experience have an emotional slant to them, but we become kind of obsessed with feelings. And I think theory, logic has gone out the window.
it almost seems like those types of things, like logic, is in and of itself the enemy. You know,
Hmm.
it takes you away from kind of social justice answers to use logic.
Yeah. And also, using logic often means not affirming what someone's saying. And therapists these days are very um, affirmatory, not just on the trans stuff, but more generally, because these days it seemed more like a kind of customer supplier relationship, I think. And therapists don't want to say something that's going to offend their client. They almost want to give the client what they want to hear. And that's not good because I think one of the biggest benefits of therapy and therapeutic relationship is actually in a respectful and trustworthy space to have some of your thoughts, feelings challenged,
Mm,
some of your irrationality highlighted. Bring to the fore things that we can't necessarily work out for ourselves. Um, so if you're not prepared to challenge clients or clients aren't willing to be challenged in return, I think you're going to struggle to deliver effective therapy as well.
So tell me a little bit more about just therapy and what you're doing with your organization.
Yeah, we set up it last December. I mean, in its basic form, it's a directory. I mean, I'll say it's a directory for non-woke therapists, which is slightly tongue in cheek. But we all sign up to the same set of principles, which is pro free speech, pro resilience, pro exploration, anti identity politics, anti ideology. Um, and I called it just therapy for two reasons. First, because of a sense of justice, because of the way that the therapeutic
Mm,
field's been uh, well, destroyed, I think, over recent years, and partly because it is just therapy. That's what we're offering. We're not offering political indoctrination. We're not offering ideological grooming. We're here to just offer therapy and not to be activists. So I've got directory. I think we've got about 80, 90 practitioners at the moment based in the UK, although I've had a lot of interest from the States, so I might expand it out. And it's a directory for people who want that kind of therapy to have a place to go for it. Um, and I've set up my own private practice as well, and I'm offering that same therapy to those who want it. We've had really good interest. We've had a lot of practitioners keen to join. I had a lot of clients who've said they don't know where else to turn, actually, because they don't feel that they can trust mainstream therapy provision, which is quite telling and quite concerning. Um, I'd like it to be more than just a directory. I'd like it to be an accreditation body. I'd like it to offer training, but
mm,
that is very difficult because the market is quite saturated, and those bodies, particularly, well, it'll be the same in the States, but in the UK, I mean, there's a couple of bodies who control the entire field, and they've got
mm,
a lot of funding. It would be very difficult to rival that. But that's a longer term ambition I've got because um, we need to start training up better practitioners, from the ground up. Um, but it's going well, and the response has been extremely positive.
mm. Fantastic. And you're involved in other stuff. You have, speaking gigs, and you're talking about how you sent someone undercover. There's a lot of stuff that you're involved in now. What else are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, I do like sending people undercover. It's quite fun, actually. I What am I doing? Well, look, I've got my clinical practice, and then I've got my kind of advocacy on the side, and on that, the bulk of my time is still spent tackling gender ideology because it's still so pervasive, and we're not out of the woods yet. But I would like to turn my attention in due course to other issues impacting society as well. Um, I also want to move the dial a bit. I'm currently looking at working on some research relating to sex reassignment surgery for adults because that's not spoke. We talk about children and puberty
Hmm.
blockers, but the surgical piece for adults doesn't get discussed enough. So I want to kind of bring that into the public arena as well. I spend too much time on social media, much to my wife's hatred, and so that's a mixed blessing and a curse because I've developed a platform and I can shine a spotlight on some of what's going on across society. But, if I'm going to be a therapist to myself, it's not necessarily the healthiest thing in the world. It's very addictive, social media, as we know. And so I'm trying but failing to restore more of a balance when it comes to that. That will be a lifelong ambition, I think. Um, yeah, I mean, plenty to keep me busy at the moment, anyway.
It's really with you talking about like being on social media and having these kind of activist or counter activist battles. It's really frustrating to see all these problems in the world and then come to a conclusion. I can't fix them all. I'm just gonna have to, you know, put my phone away for a minute and just let it be, even though like it's kind of clouding all over my mind. Like I understand that feeling.
Yeah, I'm sure you do, and you'll know that you can get dragged into things that you're not even anticipating.
Hmm.
Like because occasionally I will try and post on other things. The other day I posted something about because again my background's crime and justice. I posted something about saying that rape, the minimum sentence for rape, in my opinion, should be life without parole. Now I
Hmm.
actually support the death penalty for certain crimes, but I said the minimum sentence should be life without parole. And I attracted some very, very bizarre comments, including from people who are on my side when it comes to the gender stuff.
Hmm.
I was called woke right and I was called illiberal because of that opinion on rape. So, and then I got pulled into it wasn't an argument, it was a debate on the.
Hmm.
So this is it. There's so much going on in the world, and it is difficult to know where to turn one's attention to. Um, and yeah, you can only do so much. Again, therapeutically speaking, we can convince ourselves that we can change the world, and some people do change the world, but you know, for most of us, we can change our kind of immediate surroundings, and it's easy to put a lot of weight on one's shoulders. I get parents, teachers, other whistleblowers reaching out to me who are so concerned about what's happening in society. And they feel so guilty about the fact that they're not constantly working against it and they're not spending all their time trying to fight it. And, that's not realistic or reasonable either because people do have lives at the same time. People have got jobs, people have got children. So, I don't say that everyone should, you know, enter a lifelong battle on this because, to what end? But
Hmm.
we have at the same time seen the power of people coming together, even in the United Kingdom because of certain forms of litigation, other campaigns. I mean, some of the legal landscape on the trans issue has completely shifted. We had a recent Supreme Court judgment after a long
Hmm.
fought battle by a group of women over here. And so, you know, human beings can achieve incredible things, but I think it's important to try and temper our expectations because otherwise I think people can end up kind of eternally disappointed in themselves. I don't know if that makes sense.
It
Um,
does. It does. I've got three questions left for you.
yeah,
Um, One is, we talked like the way we talk about this kind of big debate, it feels like if someone disagrees with you on one issue, like you're my enemy now, and we can't hear each other, like there's a complete disconnect. So like as a therapist, how would you advise people just in society generally about trying to connect with people who have different opinions?
I'd encourage people to try and relish the opportunity because it's actually very, very boring to be in an echo chamber, and you're certainly not going to learn anything new about yourself. And we all need our own thinking challenged. That's how we advance. Human beings didn't advance by all agreeing on everything all the time. You advance because people threw in different opinions and then they were challenged. That's what you need. That's like the purpose of even academia, like rigorous challenging and testing of hypotheses. And so I'd encourage people to think about the benefit for them if they actually open their minds to having dialogue or debate. Um, I like it. I love debating. I don't have enough of an opportunity for it because a lot of people on the other side won't debate and they won't debate me. I'm sick of echo chambers. I find it terribly boring. So I try and encourage people in that way. Um, I think the core thing is just respect. you can vehemently disagree with someone and you can even tear down their argument in whichever way you want. But, there's never a need to go for low blows and to start attacking the person. It's like what they say in football, well, you'd call it soccer, but in football, what they say play the ball, not the man.
Mm.
So I really want to encourage more debate and dialogue across society. I'm 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 very pro free speech. I'm not in the I don't want to be shutting down people, even people I disagree with. I want a spotlight shone on what they're saying so that it can be unpicked and tested.
Mm. So my second to last question is, how do we fix the therapy profession?
Just threw that one casually in there.
It's a softball for you.
Um, I actually think that I actually think the existing therapeutic training bodies, regulatory bodies need to be figuratively burnt to the ground. I don't think they can be made better from the inside. They're too far gone. Also, they've done too much damage. I'm not sure how one could ever trust them again, given the harm that's been inflicted, particularly on children in their name. So I think we need to start again from scratch, and we need to create new schools and new bodies that focus on training decent, ethical, effective therapists. Um, I know that's a very, very difficult thing to do, but it's the only way I can see through this.
I like that. So when you look at society broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
I think narcissism and self-obsession and navel gazing. I I see it everywhere I go. It's in the reality TV we're watching. It's promoted through the brands that we love. I see it when I'm walking down the street. People have become very, very obsessed with their identity. This stretches beyond the trans stuff, manicuring themselves, physically, but also in terms of their social media persona, wanting to project something out there for everyone to see and almost live a bit of I guess, a fake life in the eyes of others and online. Um, I want people to be turning their attention outwards and looking at what they can do positively to help others in society and the difference that they can make to the world. Um, I'm sick of seeing people, particularly some of the younger generations, spending all their time just, as I said, staring into a mirror or just navel gazing, because that it's not healthy. It's not good for someone's psyche. It doesn't help us advance as a species either. Um, and also like the kind of epidemic of plastic surgery we're seeing. I mean, I belong to a fitness club, and this is I'm not being hyperbolic here. I would estimate that 80% of the women and many of the men have had plastic surgery, and some of them seem like they're made out of nothing but pure plastic. And I don't, I don't think it's good. It's clearly not good. I'd rather find a world in which we can encourage people to accept themselves and accept their imperfections rather than selling this notion that you can just change anything you don't like about yourself, for the right amount of money. Um, yeah. So I do feel really quite strongly about all of this stuff.
Hmm, that's a really good answer. James, where can people find you?
As I said, on social media most times of the day. Yeah, I've got my X profile. I've got a Substack where I put out exposés and articles. Um, if you type James Esses into Google or go onto jamesesses.com, that's my therapy practice. So if people would like to have therapy with me, I've still got some slots available. And then Just Therapy is the directory, as I said, of about 80 ethical practitioners who I can recommend, each and every one of them. And I'm happy for people to reach out to me, whatever the issue is. People can email me or they can drop me a message on X as well. I'm keen to speak to people, learn about what's going on out there, and do whatever I can to support those who are struggling.
James Esses, this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Ryan.